good evening, everybody. Is everybody ready to get started here? Let's go ahead and call to order the Lafayette Budget Committee meeting for Monday, April 19th, 2021.
Mayor Brungart,
Here.
Councilor Drebin,
Here.
Councilor Gilgan, Councilor Lee Gilgan,
Here, sorry, your classic mute debacle.
Councilor Goulart, Councilor Newman is excused. Councilor Paulson,
Here.
Lillian Barnett, Shirley Burkett, Joseph Carswell,
Here.
Jeffrey Olson,
Here.
Doreen Van Tyne,
Here.
I think I saw Greg pop up.
I did too.
Oh, hi, Greg.
Greg Goulart,
Howdy, I am present. Thank you.
Great. So did we hear from Lillian Barnett? Okay, Shirley Burkett? Doreen Van Tyne?
She's here.
Here.
Okay. You have 8 budget committee members present, Your Honor, and 1 excused.
Thank you. All right. So before we get started,
Thanks.
is that feedback?
He said they didn't hear me, but I'm here.
Oh,
I got you, Doreen.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
okay, before we get started, there's a couple of housekeeping things we have to do. We need to elect a chairperson for the budget committee. Generally, each year we try to elect someone who's not on the city council. Doreen Van Tyne has been on the budget committee for quite some time, but she's feeling under the weather and not up to being chairperson. Is there anybody who's interested in being chairperson of this meeting? All right. Well, we still have to have one. I just appoint myself. I'm not sure what the process is.
Well, somebody should
I can do it if you guys name.
nominate you, Your Honor. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, who just said I can do it?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, do you want to be the chairperson for the budget committee?
Sure.
Well, then I nominate Jeffrey Olson for the chairperson of our budget committee.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, Jeffrey, you're the man. Wonderful. Before we get too deep into this, I do have to state an actual conflict of interest for our budget. My husband's a volunteer firefighter, and our volunteers receive $5 per call. And therefore, he receives funds from the city, and those funds come from this budget. Therefore, I have an actual conflict of interest in passing items on this budget. So while I'll sit here and be present, I will not be participating in parts of the conversation, and I will not be voting in this budget. Okay. Did anyone have any questions about that?
You'll still participate in the parts that you don't have a conflict in, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I just can't vote in any of it because it's all passed as one whole budget. It's not differentiated into parts,
Right.
so. Okay, well, Preston, do you want to start with a presentation and our budget message?
Sure, Your Honor. I'd like to first welcome some of the new members, but mainly also I'd like to, if we could think about Jean Mead, who was here on our budget committee for 20+ years. She didn't make it to our budget committee this year. We're sad she passed away. And I'd just like to, for budget committee members to just take a moment of silence and think about Jean and what she's meant to the city. If we could do that for just a moment, please. What a great volunteer Jean Mead was. We're going to miss her. So before we started on tonight's presentation for fiscal year 2022, which is our fiscal year beginning July 1st of 2021, we call it fiscal year 22 because that's the budget. That's the year that our budget ends, which is June 30th of next year. So we call it our fiscal year 2022 budget. Before I get into that, I just wanted to take 2 points about current year. Before we get started, one of the things I passed out to everybody was an infrastructure funding matrix. And I try and do some subject each year before the budget committee. This year, I kind of dusted off an infrastructure matrix. And it just sort of talks about your major infrastructure of the city, how those things tend to get funded, what we're doing here in the city of Lafayette, what other traditional resources might be. I passed that out in case there is a discussion later about how to fund certain things. Then I'll kind of go back to this matrix as context and we'll talk from there. So I'm not going to go through that, but it's a nice guide for those kinds of discussions. How do we fund these kind of services? The other thing you have before you that got sent out today are utility rates, comparisons with other cities in Yamhill County. So that may come up as a subject tonight. There's some more background there. So the only other point I wanted to make on this current year is that we've had a very busy year with a lot of activity. Of course, two disasters, the pandemic and then the storm event in February. But we did go through some financial gymnastics this year with having to do a supplemental budget to bring on the ODOT project. You all might remember how spent about a year arguing that we shouldn't have to pay for this project, and then ODOT came in at the last and basically said that they would fund it, but we had to run it all through our books. $800,000 project. So that had to get designed and bid. That had to come into our budget. And so some more financial gymnastics that had to take place this year, but we did it and we're working through that reimbursable highway rebuild project, which is on our books, but that will be completed in the current year. The other couple of things we did financially this year is we also did a supplemental budget for a CARES Act project where we brought in about $120,000, and council adopted a micro grant program to distribute that to businesses and individuals. That was very successful. Again, that was something we didn't plan on, but we went through the financial gymnastics to make that happen, and it was very successful. The only other thing about the current year really is we had a budget presentation last month or the month before from our auditor, and he that's always a very good conversation, and we were able to get a clean audit for the third year in a row where there was no comment, and that's actually quite amazing. People or cities get budget awards every year, but they still get comments. This is what you got to do better. These are things you kind of messed up on, clean it up. We had no comments again for the third year in a row. So pretty proud of that. And that's really all I wanted to say about the current year financially. It's always difficult to say where you're going to end up. So you have the beginning fund balances come July 1st. And so now we're moving into
I'm on this, but
the fiscal
I
year
don't have any sound.
2022. Who's talking? We can help you out there.
Do sound on this thing.
Hey, Greg, you're not muted if you're talking.
I'm just gonna do my phone.
There, okay. Hi, Greg. He's coming back.
Okay. Okay, so for the fiscal year that we're talking about, beginning July 1st, fiscal year 2022, you have before you the recommended budget for the year. And we're going to talk about some of the initiatives that are in the budget this year as we go through the budget. So what I'd like to do is hit the highlights of the budget, go through, talk a little bit about local budget law and how budgets work in cities in Oregon, and Lafayette included. And if you can all, members of the budget committee, if you can keep your questions written down, maybe mark on pages, and when I'm finished, we'll go back. Does that sound okay with folks? We'll get through the presentation and then we'll come back and answer any questions that you have. Does that sound okay? All right.
Yes.
Okay, so in my budget message, the cover letter that goes with the budget, I talk about some initiatives in the budget. And we'll talk about those as we go through the budget, such as implementing an urban renewal district, code enforcement, affordable housing, and pursuit of a community development block grant for a second water reservoir. Also included in the budget is a 3% utility rate increase. This is for water and sewer both. You might remember that last year there was no utility rate increase for the current fiscal year. The next page in your budget, page 5, happens to be an org chart of all the citizens and council and public officials of the city, how that looks, how that works out. We have a couple of positions vacant right now. One is the training officer, who we just interviewed finalist candidates, the top 2 for that. And we also have a vacant administrative assistant position here in the front office, who we hope to get back on board by the end of this summer, assuming we're moving in the right direction with everything else that we are. So the next page, on page 6, I wanted to spend a little time on this. This is a good place to kind of pause and talk about Budget 101. This page is a summary of all the resources and the allocations in the city budget. We have 16 funds in the city. One fund is not listed here because it's all zeros, but we have to carry that for a few more years. That's our sewer debt service fund. That it's all zeros, so that's not showing on this page. But if you're looking at page 6, basically, this bottom part kind of fits over here. It's kind of across. If you wanted to look at it on a long sheet, all the way across are all the funds, all across on the columns, and you got all the categories down the side. And every box in this spreadsheet here, every box, every square basically has to be in the black at the end of the year. That's a requirement of local budget law. Not just every fund being balanced, but every category within every fund is balanced at the end of the year. And we put together a balanced budget to show the resources and the allocations and all that. But to make sure it ends up that way is another financial monitoring that we have to do with a budget. And there's oftentimes a few categories need to be shored up, and council typically does that in June. When you adopt the budget for the next year, you also tidy up a few categories to make sure we're still in the black at the end of the year. So on this page, basically, local budget law in Oregon is fund accounting. Every fund is listed. All the monies that are in it are transparent, and there's no such thing as use it or lose it. Local governments in Oregon don't work that way. We don't work that way. Maybe the feds do or the state does, but we don't. We have no monies in the cities where if they don't get spent, we lose them. If something doesn't get spent, it rolls over to the next year. And I'll kind of point that out in a couple of cases. Well, I'll point it out right here. You can see the first line category under your funds is beginning fund balance. That's the carryover that we anticipate in June 30th of this year. We're going to carry over all of that money into those budgets next year. Ending fund balance becomes your beginning fund balance for the next year. But we have no monies that are risk being lost if you don't use it. The only time that really comes up is with a grant. There would be grant conditions. You got to use it by a certain date. And there's no money in this next year's budget that is affected like that. I'll talk about grants a little later. All those grants are multi-year. They always get carried over. So another thing here, I use the term resources and allocations. That's really kind of more accurate than revenues and expenditures because there's a lot of revenues in the budget that are just moving money around. For instance, the last line items here, the unappropriated, the interfund loans, all of those monies inflate your budget, but it doesn't do anything. It's just money being moved between funds. It doesn't produce services. It doesn't produce projects. So even though we have a $9.6 million budget, millions of dollars here is tied up in unappropriated or interfund transfers that doesn't produce any service. It's financial accounting. Every time a resource is allocated, that shows up either as an expense or revenue. Every dollar shows up as either an expense or a revenue. That's why I like to use the term resources. How many resources does the city have? How does it get allocated? And again, most of that money doesn't get spent. It gets carried over. It's tied up. Let's see. So that's kind of an overview of local budget law. This sheet kind of tells it all as far as what we have to comply with. Every every square, every category within every fund has to be balanced. And I can certainly, if we get into any of the subject areas, we can discuss any of that in detail if you want. Every fund has a set of categories, and you can see many of these are blank, they're not used. Some don't even apply, some are restricted. Some funds, you can only spend them a certain way. The general fund is really your backbone of the city. It can be used on anything you want. All the other funds are restricted in one way or another. So that makes a difference on how you might want to spend money, is how restrictive the funds are. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go in and talk about our CIP. So I'd like to move on to the next page, our debt service page. And this is really a wonderful page in the budget, because those of you that have been on the budget committee remember all the debt that we had on there before, which has now come off, only to be replaced by new debt, but not near as much. Our sewer debt to build the wastewater treatment plant came off the books in the current year. The water fund to pay some of the water improvements from 20 years ago, all of that got paid off and came off the books. In its place is the fire station bond, which was an elected bond measure, a general obligation bond measure. The loan from general fund to water for the pump station project, and then the McMinnville Water and Light loan to get the intertie built. Those three things are now on our debt service. They're much shorter term. They're not as large as the other debt that came off the books in the current year. So that's a wonderful thing here. Also on your debt service summary page, I've listed all the years left. We're basically in year 2 in the general fund loan to water and year 2 in the MAC Water and Light, paying back for the intertie. The MAC Water and Light is a little bit different because those payments are set, and it's not symmetrical. You can see how the debt load increases as time goes by. From about 70,000 this current year to 207 for a few years, and then 275 for 4 years. That was done intentionally to help us with our cash flow in the city. So let me go ahead and move on then off of the debt page and mention the next page. This is our payroll distribution by fund. And what you have listed there are all employees on the left-handed side. We have 11.58 employees programmed into this budget. And how those employees' salary and benefits are paid for goes across the funds. All of these funds across the top, you can see how staff time is apportioned in each one of those funds. What's programmed for next year did not change from the current year. One significant thing about this is in the corner, you've got an allocation by percent of the general fund, water, sewer, and street. And that allocation there is used to divvy up some certain citywide chargebacks that all funds should pay for. That's going to become more clear as in a couple of pages is all, but how we apportion staff time across the funds is listed by percentage on page 8, and then page 9, it's listed as salary. So you can see how the percentages go across and how the salaries go across. So page 10, we'll spend a little more time talking about that. These are some of the financial changes implemented in this year projected proposed budget. And I want to go down most of those. In these categories 1, 2, and 3, I'll talk briefly about each one of those, but number 1 especially, I mentioned some of the significant financial policies of the city, and I repeat those in the budget every year. Basically, it talks about that we're a modified cash basis of accounting, which means that we recognize expenditures when we spend the money, not when we're encumbered. We recognize revenues when they're received, not when they're planned. It's a cash basis. And I would say most smaller cities are that way. We capitalize assets of 5,000 or greater. That's pretty typical. I mentioned here about the addition of a code enforcement program where we've added some line items in the general fund for abatement and legal fees. I'll point those out when we get there. There's a provision to be reimbursed for FEMA, $30,000. This is to reimburse for expenses we had during the storm event in February. A halftime training officer is listed in this budget. We've got an affordable housing incentive built into the budget, which we've never had before. And I'll explain that down on the bottom part of this change on this page when I get to it there. Let me skip to the next part, the chargebacks to the general fund. These are these expenditures like the audit, insurance, copier charges, and the like. Those are citywide expenditures that the main operating funds of the city should pay their fair share on. So over using the payroll distribution from the prior page, we apply that to these citywide expenditures, and then those become the chargebacks to the general fund. You can see that about $85,000, about $40,000 of that is all paid by the general fund, and then water, sewer, and street pay their fair share. We don't have, most of you would be familiar with the concept of an overhead charge. We don't have overhead charges. This section 2 here, these chargebacks, that's as close as you can come to an overhead charge that a lot of organizations have, most cities have. We don't have that. We specifically look at certain charges to allocate, and so we do that here in section 2. The transfers summary, section 3, is another very important summary page. I include all the things that happen between the funds in one place to show all that. How each fund contributes to our reserve funds. The capital fire equipment fund, every year the general fund gives $50,000 toward that fund. The city hall building fund, you can see how that's apportioned among the operating funds. Vehicle equipment and replacement fund, the same way. There's your chargebacks again. What's new on this transfer list is those 4 things at the bottom. This is affordable housing subsidy, which we don't have, but a lot of cities make a program for that, and we haven't. We've never had a Habitat for Humanity house built in the city. The Housing Authority did one this year, their first one. It was very successful. They're looking at doing more. And this subsidy is a way that if somebody is doing an affordable housing project like Habitat, like the Housing Authority, and they came to the city and says, gee, can you can you waive some of your SDC funds to help with this affordable housing project? Well, you don't want to waive SDC funds. That's not a good policy. So what this does here, there's $20,000 among our 4 SDCs, water, sewer, streets, and parks. And basically, you could do 5,000 a house and do 4 houses. You could do half SDCs for 2 houses. But there's 20,000 in here, and a general fund subsidizes those SDC funds if the council at a future date wanted to entertain a request to subsidize those SDCs for affordable housing. That may never come up, but if it does, you've got a budget here to allow you to do that. And this is part of one of the things that came out of a conversation with Councillor Drummond, who wanted to see some initiatives in affordable housing, and this is one of them. The other thing, which I think Jim and I talked briefly about, really occurs when we look at the area in the southeast part of the city that's right now zoned industrial, how that could come in to the city through urban renewal and be recategorized as housing. Right now we've got an R1 and an R2. Well, maybe we need an R3, something that deals with affordable housing better. And that can be worked out with a study funded by urban renewal that can look at that and not only convert the land into something very usable, housing, but also achieve more goals, affordable housing, because right now we have an affordable housing element of the city, but we don't provide any incentives. And the state is in such a housing crisis. When we did our urban growth boundary a few years ago, they did not require us to look at affordable housing. They said, just get the density going, get what you need, and move on. So that was the focus. So there's a few things that the city could do, especially through urban renewal, but this subsidy here to help general fund assist in that way is something nice to have on the books, and it provides council an option should that ever come up. So that's kind of a nice summary page, all of the accounting changes, our transfers, our chargebacks. So let's go ahead and move on to the next page with more summaries in terms of cost factors. I kind of include these numbers that drive some of the budget changes, some of the line items if we have to increase, like utilities and fuel, which we didn't this year. We're not increasing those. You can see some of the changes this year. It gets a little higher in our insurance, citywide insurance, but overall, not a difficult increase in costs affecting us. What this doesn't show is construction cost index, which tends to run about 6% to 8% a year. That's not listed here. That's where we go out for projects and we're at the mercy of the bidding climate and construction prices at the time. And those things tend to affect us the most, is those projects when they come in with a construction index of 6% or higher. And so when we factor in projects, which we're getting to the very next page, we try to price them where we expect them to be a year from now and budget for that. Okay, so also on this page, we've got a listing in the top right corner there about the grants that are in the budget. Those first 3 grants comprise our facade grant program of $50,000. You can see that's a combination of the city Yamhill County, and Waste Management of Oregon. Those grant funds have not been used, so they roll over every year. We've got the city's grants to nonprofits listed there. We've got an SCA grant. We were awarded by ODOT $100,000. That's in this year's budget. In terms of the new COVID relief monies, this is the American Rescue Plan Act. We are expecting them to receive some. I programmed in 150,000. It could be more, it could be less, who knows? And if we have to make adjustments throughout the year for something particular, we can do that, like we did in the current year. But for now, I threw in 150. I've also got 50,000 as a catch-all for something that comes up. It could be anything, really. It's not particular, but it's in the general fund. It's a grant in and a grant expense. So that if we do get something, that can be administered and utilized within the general fund. Also included in the budget is a proposed utility bill increase of 3% on both water and sewer. I mentioned here the expected revenues that could be generated annually for water and sewer enterprise funds, and the reasons for that, and why it's important to keep up on inflation. And the last increase in sewer was 2011, and it's important to look at both water and sewer this year. So we'll come back to that subject. The next page, 12, that's our proposed capital improvement program for this coming year. 1.6 million, 12 projects. They're all very important. About half of these are carryover projects from the current fiscal year, some of which would have been done this year had it not been for the ODOT project coming in and pushing everything to the side. Not everything, but many things. We can see that water meter replacements will be in year 2 of 6 of that, replacing meters all year round. Well, finishing off the fire station and site development, which includes a parking lot at 4th and Market. Bridge Street repairs. This is digging out some failed spots, adding rock base, overlay, doing patches. We need to keep up on that. We can do possibly some other patches around town. Not a whole lot, but bridge is something we have to keep up on. The water emergency plan is a requirement from EPA. This is actually a part 2, which is due the end of this calendar year. We're finishing part 1 now, which is an assessment of our resiliency in our water system, what security measures we have in place, and what plans do we have in case hazards emerge or disasters. So the assessment is being done by June 30th, and the plan, the second part, is due at the end of the calendar year. We've got a sewer upgrade at 4th and Monroe. Our annual biosolids beneficial use program is going to be with us for a few more years. We've got probably 3 more years, possibly 2. At that point, we will have emptied both of our lagoons, and we could come into an arrangement with our local farmers and the hauler to where we can spread what we use, basically what we collect, what we generate each year, and do that every 2 years or possibly even 3 years. So we're still on an annual program, an expensive program for the next 2 to 3 years. And then after that, it'll be mainly just getting rid of what we generate on a multi-year basis. The project number 7 is important. It's It's mainline meters for all of our transmission lines coming into town from Dayton and Mackwater and Light on one line and coming off of the watershed into the city on the other. We monitor those, put in vaults and meters to see what actually is arriving in the city. That way we can find if we do have a leak on those transmission lines. Right now, as much as we walk them and detect them with leak detectors, we're not seeing leaks, but we're losing water somewhere. So these vaults are important to put in master meters. And then up at our reservoir in our watershed, we have to install a dechlorination station. And what that entails is if there's any overflow at our reservoir, because the reservoir is treated water, any overflow at that point, then it goes through a dechlorination facility before it goes to waste. And this right now, we don't have any overflow issues. This is more of a preventive in case there was, and it's a requirement of the state that we do that. Madison Street project improves 3rd Street on the west side from 3rd to 4th, puts in a right turn lane, half street improvement. And with that project, that triggers private development at the Shell station to complete and expand their development on that block to include a drive-through of their tanker trucks from, it would be from Jefferson to Madison Street, pardon me. No, it would be from Market to Madison Street. Parks improvements, number 9, that is a catch-all for something that comes up. It's if we have a playground piece of equipment that goes down, that could be replaced. We replaced a slide that way this year. There could be something that we want to do to improve a park. This would be where we would find that money in addition to the general fund budget with parks, but there's no program for that money. It's available should something come up. The pedestrian crossings, we anticipate 2. The first one would be on Water Street, South Madison Street. You see where water comes in just north of Terry Park. There would be a button activated crosswalk there. Where a button activated, meaning from either side, a pedestrian could hit a button and the signs would flash to alert traffic that you need to stop. And the same kind of crossing we anticipate for the following year on Bridge Street to cross Highway 99.
Yeah.
So this project number 10 is a kind of a multi-year project to take care of those 2 crossings. Number 11 is a automated control systems for both our water and sewer facilities. This is a very expensive project, mostly software, some hardware, to make sure that we have all of our facilities, water and sewer, our lift stations, our water treatment, our wells, all of that information and data from those facilities are monitored and they can be controlled automatically, manually and automatically. And this really gets us into the 21st century. The current SCADA systems that we have is not supported anymore. And so we're kind of on the last leg. And so this is a continuation of this project, which started in the current fiscal year. The last project is a storm drainage project on West Water Street, which involves some private residences and that hook into a city system, and we need to clean that up. We had some near flooding in that area because of the private system. And it all comes from our system, a public system. So we need to clean that up, and this project does that. So we're pleased about that. All of these, the funding for all of these projects is listed by project. There's a narrative attached, and the summary is below. You can see by fund how much money is projecting to be spent and or what could be made available for these projects. The one I want to point out though is the fire station. There's $578,000 in there. That's more than enough to build the parking lot, finish off the fire station, and do some sidewalk there. But it's more than plenty. But what I've done is I've just included all of the bond monies from the fire station that are left and put them in that project. So it's all there. It could be used if it had to be, but we don't intend to spend nearly that amount of money that's allocated there. So that's an overview of all of our capital improvement projects. It would be real nice if we could get those done and something else doesn't come in and push everything off to the side like we've had the last 2 years. You can remember 2 years ago, it was the pump station and rallying all the funds of the city to get that pump station completed. This year, it was the ODOT project, running that through the bucks of the city. Hopefully there won't be another one like that next year. We can focus on these and get those done. That would be really nice. So a great list of projects there. So if you could turn to page 14. This is an overview of our 3 reserve funds of the city. The City Hall Building Fund, Fire Capital Equipment Fund, and a Vehicle Replacement Fund. I've got how much those funds have in the budget for next fiscal year and how that relates to replacing fire equipment in that fund and the public works fleet. You can kind of see what some of those replacement costs are done. As those vehicles come up in their useful life, then those are the vehicles, those are the equipment pieces that come before the budget committee and the council to say, these are the ones that are due to be replaced. Under fire equipment, you can see that the self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBAs, there's 12 of them. Those were all replaced as part of the new fire station this year. Those were replaced from this fund, so now they have a new life cycle beginning in 2020. Okay, all the policies for these 3 reserve funds were all done in 2016. Requires the funds to be spent on construction. And those policies have to be revisited by state law every 10 years. Okay, the next page is an important summary page that shows what's new in the budget. So those are the in at the top, and then what's not in the budget. Those things that are listed as out. And I always have this in each year's budget so we don't lose sight of, say, some projects or large expenditures that are coming at us. So I want to start at the bottom there and talk about the things that are out right now. And we anticipated having to do a complete headworks replacement at our wastewater treatment plant this next year, and that will not need to be done. We put a lot of money in improving systems this year, upgrading, and so that project is not going to be needed this next fiscal year. That next one, water crossings, number 20 on the list. That was anticipated as a second part to our water crossings that we're doing now across Highway 99. And that will not need to be completed next year because we basically did that with the ODOT project, except for about $25,000, which will complete as an in-house project this next fiscal year. The last thing I wanted to mention on the out projects is the reservoir. In my budget message, that was one of the initiatives we had this year. This is the real next big water improvement that the city has to start thinking about is a second reservoir. Right now, the city has one 500,000 gallon reservoir, which is very inadequate, and I'll explain that. But what's in the budget this year is to just pursue that. There's no money in there to design or build, but we are in process now of trying to apply for CDBG funding for a reservoir. Community development block grant funding is tend to be used for smaller cities that are qualify. So we're looking at applying. There's a process we have to go to, but by September we'll be applying for CDBG monies for a reservoir because right now we're eligible. We're still eligible for CDBG. Next, if we waited another year until the census data come out, we may not be eligible again. And in order to get funding, it's based on when you apply, not when you build. So it's important that we get our foot in the door there and pursue that, and we'll see where that goes. It would start, hopefully it would start with some technical assistance for design and then actually move into a later year where you actually construct. But so let me talk about the importance of a second reservoir. And it is critically important for three reasons. One is storage. Currently, our 500,000 gallon reservoir provides some storage, but if we need to rely on that for fire flow or just plain storage, we're not producing water. It's literally will run out in a matter of hours. So from a storage standpoint, EPA likes communities to have 3 days of water storage. We don't have that. So the second reason why it's really important to have a second reservoir is for operations. If you have two reservoirs, you can take one down and maintain it while the other one runs, and vice versa. We went through a major rehab of our reservoir about 4 years ago. We spent about $250,000 only because we never had a second reservoir. We don't want to go through that again. Just about every major system, every municipal system in the of cities in Oregon, I don't know of any that don't, but has two reservoirs. It's very typical for a municipal system. Again, we only have the one. The other operational reason it's critical to have a second reservoir is for fire flow. If we did have a major fire in the city, we only have so much time before we drain a reservoir if we're fighting a fire. So it's important to have operational backups for maintenance and for fire flow, for the storage. And the third reason why it's critically important to have a second reservoir is resiliency. Right now we have MAC Water and Light and our joint system with Dayton coming over the Yamhill River bridge. If something happens to that bridge, then we've lost access to drinking water from the joint system and from Mac Water and Light. So having additional resources up on our reservoir on this side of the river is also important for resiliency in the event of a disaster, of an earthquake, or some other reason where one of our primary sources is cut off. We would have enough to keep the city going for a while by having this second reservoir up at our watershed. You might recall that when we did our water CIP update a few years ago, we downgraded from a 2 million gallon reservoir to a 1 million gallon reservoir, realizing it's still essential and it's on our CIP list of our master plan. So one of the initiatives again this year is to pursue and get our foot in the hopper with CDBG. But there's no money associated with that in the budget for now. It's just pursuing that those federal grants. So the other section of the budget here is a narrative that explains our basis of accounting. It explains municipal accounting, and there's several terms that are used in this narrative, and those are defined. Then you come to, starting on page 23, your what's called your local budget forms. And so let me explain these forms a little bit. Technically, this is all the data that a city has to have to comply with local budget law. And that was what this city had when I got here, basically. And but to explain what the city does on these kind of forms is not helpful. That's why all of these summary sheets are provided that we just kind of did a real brief overview on. All of those summary sheets are essential to understand what the city does. What's in our financial plan for the next year? What are our projects? How does the money get spent? Those summary sheets are important for the lay member and a committee member, and even for staff and budget committee members to directly find some things instead of having to pull them out of line items. So these forms are set up, and you can see how there's a column: recommended budget, approved budget by the budget committee, and then eventually adopted budget by the city council. That's the current budget moving forward. There's always 3 prior years listed as a reference to everything that goes on in the budget. You have 3 prior years of information ongoing every year. And when we do general ledger accounting, we assign where money comes into and where it goes. That all gets related back to the line items in this, on these local budget forms. I don't spend a lot of time talking about those. Those certainly can be subjects of discussion. I try to provide the summaries more so as you know, what the city is trying to accomplish, but you can certainly talk about any line items in particular if you want. But this lays out the course basically of what our objective is. The budget committee's objective is to set the financial plan for next year, fiscal year 2022, to provide all the resources and allocations necessary to do what it is you think you might want to do during the year. Once the budget committee approves it, sends it on to the council has to adopt it in final form prior to July 1st. And the council can't just change everything. They only have certain latitude to change the budget at that point. The general rule of thumb is 10%, which is a lot. You got a big fund, 10%. But if you have to change something more than 10%, and frankly, I don't think it's ever come up, you'd have to go back to the budget committee. So the budget committee, the lay members are essential to this process. It's a very important process. And I've been doing this in Oregon for many years, decades. About mid-career, I went to California, and believe me, I will never complain about Oregon budget law again. I will never complain. California has no local budget law. You don't have to adopt a budget. You don't have to have a balanced budget. You don't have to have citizen participation. You don't have a budget committee. This is California. Now you know why cities go broke. We don't do that in Oregon. I tell you, and it's most local budget law. It's very regimented, but it's common sense. And I tell you, I've been on the other side, and it's no good. I love Oregon local budget law. So anyway, with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks, my presentation, and open it up for questions.
All right, everyone, what questions do you have?
I have a question. This is Joseph. As we add more and more houses on the new build going on down the street, is there any estimates of how much in revenue will be gained for water and sewer?
You bet there is. That all relates to two things: SDCs and your utility revenues you get from water and sewer.
Okay.
And I don't calculate utility revenues much in terms of what we're going to gain. You have those mostly fees and stuff, but as with more homes, you get more services. There's more infrastructure to maintain. So I don't use the utility rates as a means of saying, how do we get more money from new growth to pay for more new growth? Really, the only place we count on that is with the systems development charges. And right now, for a new home to be built in Lafayette, it's about $18,600. And it's split up into streets, water, sewer, and parks. And those are designed that when new homes come on board, they pay for their fair share of the system that they're buying into. So those system development charges are significant, and that's where you get the money to extend the services, put in mains, repair streets, bring them up to city standards. Let me give you an example. In your one of our special funds is the sewer SDC fund. This is on page 45 of your budget document. It's page 23 of the LB 50 forms, but this is our sewer SDC fund. And you can see that we have some projects this year which could utilize some SDC monies. That's listed under your capital outlay. But underneath that, you can see unappropriated fund balance. There's $571,000 there that's not allocated, that is in reserve within the SDC fund for a major sewer project. And I say major, but it could be a main extension. It could be an upgrade at the wastewater treatment plant. We're utilizing some of that money for the SCADA system, but these SDC funds are highly restrictive, and they can be only used to expand growth, expand the capacity of your systems, or it's used in regional facilities like your wastewater treatment plant. So that's one example there, Joseph, that shows where we gather those funds for meeting growth needs. And we have the same SDC funds for parks, water, and streets. Water doesn't have much money. Basically, what's in the water SDC fund for next year is what we expect to get from the new development. Right now, that's phase 1 of Meadowbrook. We've based SDC revenues in this budget based on 60 new homes, phase 1 at Meadowbrook. There could be more. Phase 2 could come in next fiscal year. That would add more to it. But each one of those new phases are going to add SDC funds, and that will help us better provide those facilities to meet future growth. One other growth idea thing I want to mention there, if I could, basically, the SDCs are a flat rate for when it comes to homes. When it comes to businesses, I have to have the city engineer apply an analysis for water, sewer, and streets. Parks does not apply to commercial. So I mention that because growth is not always paid in that fashion. Let me have you turn to one other page. This is our fire bond fund, and that's on page 52 of your budget. This, for the fire station bond fund, you might recall, is a general obligation of the property taxes of the city. So when the voters approved that, it was a $5.2 million bond, and that's set to be repaid in symmetrical payments every year. Pardon me, that's not the bond. That's building the fire station. It's the fire bond debt service fund. And I am going to, here it is. I'm sorry. I got started on wrong. Page 44. This is your fire service debt fund. This is where we pay back the bonds every year. And this amount here, the $183,000, that's the amount that's raised, that's collected by the assessor every year from this community to pay off that bonded debt. And it appears as a rate on your property taxes, but each year as growth occurs, that amount gets spread out among more people. So when this was initially put in at around 90 cents, or 93 cents, 4 cents, whatever, it's gone down every year because it gets spread out to more people. So in this fashion, a fixed cost is paid by others who come into the system. That rate this next year might be down to 80 cents per thousand. And it'll continue to go down as long as there's growth in the community. So having the fire station come in at a time of growth, luckily we got our water stuff done in time, helps pay for those costs. And this is another way of doing it, to spread out those costs. Sorry, long answer.
What other questions do you have?
Hey, Preston, I've got a question. I'm gonna be referencing pages 8, 9, and 24 on here. So first on page 24, and this is just for an example, I assume it kind of acts the same for each of these funds. But on line 8, it says total personnel services. That's based on the 2.06 FTE, which is, I believe, page 8. I see a number on line 2 for 141,200, but on page 9 for the general, that's 133,503. I'm wondering why those numbers don't match up.
Okay, let me see if I follow you there.
So the salary, so line 2, the 141,200 on page 24 for the salaries based on 2.06. And then on page 9 at the bottom for the general fund, it's 133. So there's around $7,000 or $8,000 difference. And that's just on the salaries, not any of the other stuff. So I'm just wondering, is that a contingency? Why don't those numbers match?
Well, you are correct that it's part of that is contingency. You can see from page 8 how the people are split across the fund.
Yes.
And if one of those employees might be due a step increase, they might be due a COLA increase. Those things are added into that. Because what you have on page 9 is all of the salaries as of June 30th. It does not include the COLAs, for instance, that would get approved with the budget that would go into July.
Okay.
What else it might be?
So you're basically allowing for some adjustment the following year, but you're saying it's pretty close ballpark. Is that?
Well, correct. Yes.
Okay.
All of your, you can see within personal services, like page 24, you've got everything included there in terms of fringe benefits.
Right. I was talking just about the salaries because that was what was on page 9. Is this the salary summary? I didn't mean to cut you off. I was mostly looking at just the salary.
Yeah.
So a couple follow-up questions. You're saying that you hope to have an administrative assistant office filled, but we're budgeting 0 for the year. What's going on with that?
That, like going back to page 8, this 11.58 staff, full-time equivalents, those are all included in the budget at those levels. You can see how there's one person that's 3/4 time. I've got 3 that are half-time, one's at a third time. All of those are in the budget as if they were here come July 1st.
Right,
now,
but
we know that's not going to happen with a couple of positions. But they're all in the budget as if we're going to be here July 1st.
So we're budgeting for an office assistant, even though it's currently showing as 0 in page 9.
Yes, and that should have been filled in with an amount. If I see that here on page 9, I should have included that. For some reason I didn't. I don't know.
Okay.
Pass me, but no, that is included in the budget, Jim, and that's good you pointed that out. But that is in the budget. It's not reflected in the summary sheet.
Okay, and maybe that's where that difference in numbers came from. That my first question was based on. So, and then another follow up to these 2 charts. I looked at the last couple years, and it looks like 2 years ago was correct. but last year and this year, pages 8 and pages 9 don't match up on all the cases. For example, I'm just going to show this, the assistant city administrator. On page 8, we've got values in all the categories, but then the actual amounts are different. And I think that might have been an oversight last year. And then you said nothing's really changed this year. I would like to see those corrected. But for example, the general fund for the assistant city administrator is showing 30%, but the amount on the next page is actually 40%. And it's a number of other positions too. I just jotted it down, and I can send you my notes, but I think these 2 pages need to be corrected. I'm assuming the values are correct, but the percentages need to be updated to reflect that. And then those percentages of full-time equivalents would need to be percolated into the LB forms at the last part of this packet.
Well, I can do that, Jim. You
Okay.
bet. I
Okay.
I will verify that first.
You've got a week to do it. How's that?
You bet. You bet. We can do that, Jim. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, who else has a question?
I have one. Preston, how difficult on a scale of 1 to 10 do you think it would be to reconcile this budget without a 3% utility increase?
It would not be difficult. If the budget committee wanted to say, take that out, we don't even want that 3% increase there. I can do that. I can do it next week if that's what you wanted. Basically, that says you're not going to increase rates. So let me mention a couple things along those lines. What's also included in this budget, not just a 3% increase on water and sewer, is a utility rate study. Water and sewer combined. Let me see how much I put in there for that. I think it's 40,000.
I think it's 40,000.
Yes, 40,000. That is also in the budget. And if the city council wanted to do a rate study, the money's there to do that. If you wanted to consider a rate increase of 3% July 1st or sometime throughout the year, you've got that in the budget to do that. Anything like project related, like our CIP, each one of those projects, the urban renewal contract to do that work, the rate utility study work, all of those decisions would be done by council at a later date. If they're not in the budget, they don't come forward as a consideration. But you could say, okay, let's leave the rate increase in there for now. If the council wanted to do that in July, you would have a separate piece of legislation to implement the rate increase for July. Doesn't change the budget. If you wanted to do a rate analysis, that could be done at any time throughout the year. It's in the budget. That's a decision council would make. All of the projects we're working toward, we're designing those, we're planning for them, but the actual decision to award those projects would be based on a bid, and those would all come before council before those get enacted. If there's something in the budget that's within my authority of $15,000, I would implement those unless they're of a particular nature, such as an intergovernmental agreement or a grant situation. I run all that stuff by council. So for something significant, like a project award, a consultant agreement award, or a rate increase, those are all future council decisions. But they need to be in the budget if you're going to consider that.
Well, I don't know the feelings of the rest of the budget committee, but as a member of the council and a member of the budget committee, just given that we were just assisting people with these bills months ago, and given that we're in a pandemic era, fully understanding we haven't increased these in some time, I would prefer not even to see them in the budget.
And that was a little bit where I was going earlier when I mentioned the new rates coming from the new developments. And if we're concerned in the future about affordable housing, I mean, we can kind of implement it now by not raising rates, right?
Very much agree.
So I echo the same concerns.
Yes.
However, now, that doesn't mean I'm for or against. I want to make sure that with the repayment that we have to Mac Water and Light, we start seeing some big bumps. That we're not setting ourselves up for having to, bump it up by 10 or 15% in the future. So maybe we can go this year without it. But I'd like to see, instead of saying, okay, now we have to do it 5% year after year after year to get caught up, what's going to set us up right so that we don't have to have yearly or even every couple year rates. We can say, this is going to be it for a while. But I also think that should probably be a separate discussion from the budget.
Yeah, and Jim, I agree with what you're saying there. Obviously, we don't want to set ourselves up for failure on those obligations down the line. I think my approach is just given the current circumstances of many American households, I think that the heavy lifting might be done by less spending by the council than more taxing or more fees from the general public
Yeah, I hear that.
at this given time.
Yeah, and it's also a good time to consider a rate analysis. You've got several big projects behind you now. Those costs are known. We've got debt schedules that are differing, especially like the Mac Water and Light one. And about year 5 of the debt payments to Mac Water and Light, the city needs to have a good plan to fund the reservoir, as well as what kind of a buy-in does the city want to make in year 10 or 15 into a regional water treatment system. And because right now we buy water from Mac Water and Light. If you're an equity owner in a regional system, you don't pay for that water. You pay for your share of the operations, but you are an equity owner in the output of that facility. So there's considerations to not only meet your current needs and but also future debt, future projects, and future buy-in to a regional facility. So this may be a very good year to not raise rates if you don't want to. You don't have to, but it's not going to break anything, but it does limit you in what you can do in the near future. By keeping up with inflation, you don't have to come back and kick up rates exorbitantly like a lot of the cities around us in Yamhill County have had to do. They haven't kept up, and so they have to come back and raise rates heavily. And you can get a sense of that on those rate comparison that we provided for Yamhill County cities. Now, a CDBG grant, or possibly even a loan, the federal government will require those folks to raise rates if it's not being funded adequately. That could apply to us, it may not, but that's something else to think about when it comes to CDBG monies. But you're not going to break anything in the budget. We're going to make all of our bills. I can tell you exactly where it can come out of the budget. If you don't want the rate increase there, I would say keep the rate analysis in there for more discussion in case you want to go down that road. And I think now is a good year to maybe consider that. So is it So.
Preston,
coming
may I,
back-
may I add to a couple of things you just said there? I'm not opposed to the rate study. I don't think that's a bad idea. We should definitely consider that on the council this year. But I will say, you mentioned that it limits us, and I think that's true anytime we have less money coming in, right? I mean, if all of our accounts were 10 times what they are right now, we would be less limited than we are now. As far as keeping up with inflation, I think raising this rate raises a little bit of an inflation cost concern for residents here because it's inflating their cost of living here. And then finally, I would just mention that the comparable rates, I looked at that and I understand we're not quite middle of the pack. We're lower on the rates a little bit, but I'm not sure that necessarily I don't think that means we need to be more expensive simply because surrounding cities are.
Correct. It's just always been a common interest among the budget committee and the council to see what our peers are doing. So no, it doesn't force us to do anything. I try to learn from their mistakes whenever I can. And I tell you, when going to these regional water task force meetings and I learn about their woes, I tell you, I'll take Lafayette's problems any day than a lot of these other cities that are struggling mightily. I tell you, it's, so we are in financially, we are in pretty good shape, but what I'm hearing is that you would prefer to have the rate increase taken out, but leave the rate study in.
I can't speak.
Anybody,
I can't speak for others. I think I was the only one who mentioned leaving the study in, but I can't speak for others. But that sums up my position.
Yeah. I can come back with the budget adjusted along those lines, unless there's an objection from somebody. I can bring that back to you next week.
I'd like to see that, and we can leave the rate study in. Council can decide to do that or not at a later point if we see it's necessary. But yeah, let's see what the budget looks like without that.
Does anyone object to that? Okay.
No,
Preston, I've got a couple questions about the CIP on page 12.
Okay.
So the first one on number 10, so the pedestrian crossings. So I believe council recently, said, okay, we're going to spend 40,000 on the Water Street activated crossing. So I'm understanding that the other 50,000 is being left for designing of another Bridge Street crossing or for the design and implementation of that.
Well, I would say both. We don't know what we're looking at for the Bridge Street yet. We got to wait for the ODOT project to come in and get done. And once they're done, then we can look at coming back with a design and a project to do Bridge Street. But we do have the construction of the Water Street crossing there, or I should say Madison Street at Water Street.
Mm-hmm.
So this is enough to cover that construction and construction management, as well as design the Bridge Street. Now, how far that could go as far as construction, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be affecting another budget, a future budget, fiscal year 23. You would come back and say, okay, this is what we need for that pedestrian crossing at Bridge. We just don't know that right now.
So I guess that was my concern, because we'd already said, okay, it's going to take 40,000 for the Water Street, and then we're going to spend the remaining 50 on designing. And I think, I don't know, that sounds like a lot for figuring out something that is kind of the same thing that we're already doing for less than that. But
Jim, can I jump in on that?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I echo Jim's concerns here. I'm totally good with the 40,000, but if the 50 is just to design, and if my understanding is correct, that the implementation would not happen until the following fiscal year, given whatever else is going on down there with ODOT and whatnot, perhaps this is a better item for the next fiscal year, that remaining 50, instead of designing one year, implementing another, It's just kind of what comes to mind when I hear Jim's thoughts.
Yeah, you could certainly do that, postpone, but these amounts for each one of these projects, this isn't just construction. It's all your soft costs. It's design, surveying, it's bidding, it's construction management. It's trying to be inclusive of all of those costs that can be capitalized under this project for each one of these. So when we talk about, having money in there for the crossing, it's not just to construct, but it's to possibly bid it if we have to bid it, design it, and everything else. It's not just construction. So if you wanted to say, focus number 10 just on the Madison Street crossing, you could do that. And we'll come back in a future year and deal with the bridge.
Could we split them out? I guess my biggest concern is that, we've got at least previously known costs that we talked about at council and approved that, and then thrown in with kind of a vague description of the second one, which, knowing that it's over a year out, we don't have all the details, but maybe if we split those out, we could get some better detail.
Well, they're both pedestrian crossings. They're kind of similar.
Well, but
if you wanna-
one's been designed and approved, and the other one is just
Right.
in the preliminary phase. So they're different projects.
That's correct. So do you want to split that out then, is what you're saying? We could do that.
I'd like to see what that looks like.
I wouldn't be opposed to seeing what it looks like, as Jim mentioned, but for
Okay.
me, if
We can do
this
that.
is going to be pushed out to the next fiscal year, just due to the ODOT stuff downtown and other factors, I wouldn't mind seeing what it looks like, but I'm also somewhat thinking perhaps this should go to the fiscal year in which it could be implemented.
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry,
come back-
Preston, I don't mean to be
That's okay.
adding more on your plate.
Oh, no, you're fine. These are all fixes I can bring back. If this was next week, I'd do that right now. So believe me, if you suggested something that was very difficult, I'd tell you. So just go ahead and discuss what you want to do. And so far, this is all fine. These are all changes that can be easily made in the budget. And I'll break that one out. And I'll have that for you next week.
Thank you. Hey, so I had another question about the CIP. So within the last year, materials costs have doubled and tripled. I don't know if you've seen lumber prices lately. Other building materials are following suit. I know that for some of these projects, we've gotten quotes on them, and we would be unwise to not get them done as soon as possible while we still have the quote. I'm assuming there's other projects that we can't really not do. For example, number 6 with the dredging. Are there some projects on here that would be okay to wait a year or more till prices go back to normal, that we're not spending 2 or 3x what we should? I just like to see those identified as like most critical to kind of optional priority.
Well, these projects are not put in a priority because of the varied funding sources. It just, how do you weigh monies that are dedicated for a fire station versus discretionary monies that might go into another project? I mean, because of the funding sources are so different, it's hard to prioritize among the two. You can prioritize within water or sewer or SDC funds and all, but to combine them all, it's really the priority breaks down. And
So if instead of saying, instead of saying 1 through 12, it's more of a, hey, this item is a critical priority that if we don't do it this year, it's gonna be really bad on our water system or some system. Or if we don't do it, the price is likely to, double itself. We've already approved the number 11 based on the quote that you had. If materials are really going up in price, then if we let that lapse, we may be paying 50%, 70% more. So to me, that would be a high priority that needs to be done this next fiscal year. If there's some that we say, hey, that can wait until materials are closer to normal, what is maybe expected, I guess. So like high priority versus low priority instead of a rank. Does that make sense, Preston?
kind of, yeah. I don't know if I can help you on that.
Preston, can I see if I can help you, Preston?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think perhaps like for this, it's the budget, having the budget in place. I think perhaps the priority may be a council matter of implementing these CIPs once,
Yeah,
once we get to those meetings and those approvals.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for the budget standpoint, I think Preston's making sense from a budget standpoint, but perhaps the priority falls to council in the order in which we handle these.
yeah.
I'm good with that.
If and when they're handled, that's a council decision, and just being on the CIP and being budgeted doesn't mean they have to happen this year. But
Okay.
if they became so critical that they did, we budgeted for that.
And
So
Christine,
we
to
could
add to that,
certainly next year say, we could certainly this year be like, you know what, we know it's on our CIP, but this is just not a good time to do that project because of rates. That this
Right.
is not a binding, this has to be done this fiscal year.
right,
I'm good with that.
okay.
Okay.
What other questions are out there? Lillian, did you have any questions?
Let me unmute myself. I'm
Yeah.
sorry I came late. I think that Preston's work here is well thought out. I've done budgets before and so forth. So I want to thank you. And I agree with what everyone's saying. I only found one misspelt word. And I agree that sewer increase is well called for 10 years later, but the water increase, considering COVID, would just not go over well. So I'm on board with everybody and everything. I'm on the same page with you guys, and that is all.
Yeah. Shirley, do you have any questions, comments? Oh, Shirley, you're on mute. No, I'm still not.
Not coming in, Shirley.
Uh-oh, we still can't hear you. The mute button might be down on the bottom left-hand side of your screen.
She doesn't
Doesn't
look
look-
muted.
Yeah, she doesn't look muted.
Right, right.
Oh, maybe this is a microphone issue then.
Okay.
Hmm. Is Kevin able to call Shirley and ask her if she has any comments or
Yeah.
questions, and then we can listen to her on speakerphone if that's,
We could. sure.
okay. So we're gonna have Kevin call Shirley, hopefully get a hold of her that way, and so she can talk on speakerphone. Let's see, who's next? Joseph, did you have any other questions or comments?
No more. I really appreciate you asking though. Thank you.
Yeah. Doreen, did you have any questions or comments?
I do want to say thank you for your hard work and dedication in putting this together, Preston. So thank you very much.
Right.
And I'll be curious to hear the answers to the questions that everybody else has already asked.
Uh, Could I ask a question of Lillian? What time did you come in to the meeting?
It was about 7 o'clock, I'm ashamed to say.
Okay. And Shirley, do you know what time you came into the meeting?
Okay. Jamie's got the times.
Okay, Jamie's got it.
Jamie's
All right.
on it. She's on the ball here.
Okay,
Kevin. Hey Shirley, Kevin's trying to call you if you have your cell phone handy. Kevin's trying to call you on the phone if you can hear us, Shirley. We still can't hear you. Oh, she's got her phone from her, I see it.
Oh, hi, Shirley, let me put you on speakerphone. Hold on one moment.
look at how we're making it work.
Okay, Shirley, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
We hear you too. Do you have any questions or comments?
Oh, no, I'm just very interested in how the fire station's going and if we have it in the budget to start getting a fire department going with paid employees.
Okay,
Question.
Shirley, a couple things. We are looking at actually owning the fire station here later this month. We've got a few punch list items left through our architect and contractor. Once that's done, then we can put our arms around it. We'll have a fire station. So although the moving in process has already started, technically, we won't own it yet until later this month. As far as having professional staff, this budget includes some of that. We have a half-time chief, a half-time training officer, and then another firefighter EMT that's on for 4 months out of the year. During the summer, during weekdays when we need them the most. So we've got those 3 people in the budget for next year for the fire department. The office here at City Hall does provide support for those folks in fire. It will be nice eventually, fire can be more independent, but we're working toward that.
It's very important, I think, that we have an active fire department.
Yes, that's right, Shirley. And not only is it the paid staff, but also we rely heavily on volunteers.
Yes.
And we kind of fluctuate between 16 and 19 volunteers, and they are critical to us responding to calls for service. Also, within this regional discussion of fire services, our mayor is involved in discussions on a regional level as to what that might look like from a contract or a consolidation basis where current jurisdictions can combine their efforts and provide more service working together. So that's another initiative that's ongoing with our budget. And I tell you, the main thing, Shirley, and you went to every one of our design meetings, every one of our open houses. If we didn't have a station, we would not be considered in this regional fire service delivery at all. You gotta have a station to be a player. And now the city is, so that's great.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, Jeffrey, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I guess I'm mostly in agreement with everyone else about the water rates, and the sewer rates, but it's just kind of sad to see that we have to borrow money from the general fund to fund the water fund. It seems like just a little bit underfunded.
Correct. And thankfully, the general fund was in a position to be able to make ends meet. There's a lot of moving parts. We had to get a good bid. If we didn't get a good bid, we would have had to scramble and probably have to borrow money from the state even. We couldn't even fund it out internally. But it's a lot nicer when you can pay yourself than someone else. And it's unfortunate that the water is not as flush as some of the other funds, but we've had so many improvements we've had to make. But it's got us to a point to where we can provide water now to 5,500 people. Right now, our population's 4,200. And with existing resources, as far as sources of water and facilities, we're projected to be able to accommodate growth with our water system up to 5,500 people. And to have peace of mind during the summer, to not worry about meeting demand, and to look back and think that all those years of water restrictions and near misses, we never had to do a boil water notice. Just thank our lucky stars and count our blessings. Not getting a equipment failure, any pump failure at the wrong time. We got through it, and it was high anxiety. And believe me, it's better to have some debt that we're paying to ourselves rather than not having to go on a boil water notice.
Oh, I believe you. I'm in waterworks.
Oh, yes.
Do you have any other questions, Jeffrey?
No, just a comment. I'm guessing that the sewer funds can pay for the water meters because it's part of the accuracy.
The which funds, you say?
The sewer fund, it's paying $25,000 to the water meter replacement project. I'm guessing that's just for accuracy because it doesn't have anything else to do with the sewer.
Well, it actually does, because every sewer gets billed by what the water usage is. So the whole sewer utility is based on what comes through the water meter. And so the sewer side of it needs to pay its fair share. They're both enterprise funds, meaning they're supposed to stand on their own when it comes to paying their expenses. And part of sewer's fair share is to have decent meters. And so when those have to be replaced, I think water and sewer both need to share in those costs.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you. Greg, you've been awfully quiet. Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you. So my wife usually handles the budget here. And so I'm fairly new to this stuff. I did have two questions. One is on page 23, line item 10, we're talking about Ziply Fiber franchise fees. And I'm assuming we don't have Ziply Fiber in town. Is that right?
We do. That's actually used to be Frontier. Ziply bought out Frontier, so they took over their facilities.
Okay. My second question is on page, I think it's page 29. The line item for the sheriffs, 2 full-time employee sheriffs. And as you know, I've had issues with the amount that they increased us over the 3-year period. And so I'm just wondering, and maybe this isn't the appropriate place or time, just let me know and I'll shelf it for later. But, I would like to see some stipulations in here related to accountability and how much time they spend and all of that. So, and again, maybe this isn't the right time to talk about that,
That's
but
a contract.
it's a huge jump.
I think that's a contract issue rather
Yeah.
than, because if we're in the contract right now, I don't know that that's something we can just add in on a budget situation.
Correct.
Yeah,
Lee.
okay.
We're entering into the second year of a 2-year agreement. So this discussion that Greg's talking about is something that can come up here fairly soon with the council. And then about January of next year is when the council wants to start talking about the new contract, which would go in July 1st of 2022. So yeah, you've got
Okay.
metric
good with that.
issues, contract issues, and you got the financial piece. Yes.
All right. I'm good with that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Greg?
Not at this time. Thanks.
Okay. Kayla, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I'm good. I agree with everybody on the water rates.
Excellent. Lee, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Any other comments?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, maybe this is a discussion with Jim, maybe it's a discussion with Preston about the affordable housing stuff we're throwing in there. Well, I think it was 20,000 total. Sorry, I'm not on the right page here.
Correct, 20,000.
But Preston, you had mentioned that, maybe we'll use it and maybe we won't. I'm not sure, just given the current building that's happening in the town and with my perceived likelihood of somebody coming in to build, developing, affordable housing, I'm not sure that this is the correct fiscal year to input it. And I know you mentioned, technically, council or the planning commission, whoever would be up for adopting this, could waive the fees. You mentioned that's not good policy. Technically, I think policy goes to the council. They can make that decision. I'm just curious if this is the right year to put that stuff in here.
Well, if you don't have it in the budget, then you can't do it. So it's just if the money is not used, it doesn't go anywhere. It stays in the fund. But if you take it out, then you don't have an option in terms of subsidizing it. You could waive fees, but that's bad policy. So other cities have options. I just didn't want the council to be flat-footed and say, no, we can't help you in that respect. Or yeah, it's kind of baby steps, but it could make a big difference in an affordable house. And I'm not talking about somebody coming in and building 20 homes. I'm talking about maybe the very first Habitat for Humanity home in the city. Never had one before. Maybe something else that the housing authority is doing. And these are legitimate affordable housing initiatives because their clients are within their program. They're certified. It's a path to home ownership. And we don't have anything at all in terms of affordable housing that we can hang our hat on. When Jim Drebin mentioned it to me, it got me thinking, and aside from urban renewal, which could do a lot, this is something the general fund could help with. It starts out small, and it may get used, it may not, but I think it's an important option to have in case you're asked, can you help with an affordable home in Lafayette.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable removing it. I'd like it to stay. I don't want to end that option right here and now. I think I'd like to see it stay on the table for council to act on if possible, if needed.
I'd like to say a few things since my name's been thrown in a couple times in this. So when I had the conversation with Preston, you know, I had suggested, could we allow a developer that says, hey, we want to put in some affordable housing? Could we allow them to have smaller lot sizes for those affordable houses? And so we kind of trade off, you know, we allow affordable housing in the community, and the developer gets to, you know, build a couple more houses. This was, you know, not something I had considered, and I don't think that I would feel comfortable giving these kind of subsidies to a developer. I think if the situation was right with, you know, maybe something like Habitat for Humanity, you know, it definitely would be worth consideration. I wonder if we'll ever use them this coming year with the fact that nothing's been done. So I also could see saying, hey, we could make a policy exception because they're doing this as a nonprofit, not as a less profit.
You bet.
So you know, I don't have a strong opinion whether we need to keep it or get rid of it, but I'm not sure how comfortable I am with just saying, okay, who's going to use this right away? It needs to fit, and it needs to benefit our community.
And I think my thoughts line up there with what Jim's saying. I just, you know, this is basically enough for the SDC's one home, essentially. And for me, like, just to do a one-off and tie up that money in the budget there, I think whether it's bad policy or not, policy falls to the council. And, you know, I could see that being a consideration from a policy standpoint, rather than tying up, you know, 5 figures into the budget for something that has not come in front of us, to my knowledge, before. And we don't know if it will in the near future.
Correct. The 20,000 could be allocated in a way where it's all for one home, but it could be 5,000 for 4 homes. It could be 50% subsidy for 2 homes. You know, it's starting out small, but it's something there. And I think you mentioned that, yeah, this just isn't the first developer to come along. This would be a bona fide nonprofit that's developing these homes. It's a special thing. I've been trying to get a Habitat Humanity home here for many years. And for a lot of reasons, it hasn't worked out, but it shows that the city does care, and we're trying to do something on that line. Jim mentioned like the land use, how that can be changed to actually require more multifamily housing, more density, and that sort of thing. Well, right now we can't do that in our land use laws. But as I mentioned, with like the industrial piece in the southeast corner of the city, that could be rezoned to housing. It can be, doesn't have to be R1 or R2. It could be R3. It could be talking about more requirement of multifamily construction. That's where you really make some big strides. Again, that's down the line. That takes some years and some willing developers to do that. But that's how you can affect change on a large land use level through your urban renewal.
So, Preston, if we leave this in here, these subsidies, are you able to allocate those without council approval, or will it have to go to council to give those subsidies?
Those would have to go to council. Yes.
Okay.
That's I don't you know, I don't subsidize, you know, those things. That's you'd have to allocate that, and it just may not come up. But That does not happen unless council decides it.
Okay, if council has to be like a gate for that, I'm okay with leaving it in.
Yes. Yes, they are.
I have one more topic to bring up. I'm sorry, everybody, that I'm prolonging this analysis. I noticed that if my initial reading was correct, we are increasing the budget for the enforcement officer by about 37%.
Actually, no, that hasn't changed.
Thought
We
I saw
have,
55,000 in there.
yeah, 20,000 of it is for abatement and 5,000 for legal. So as far as like the salary goes for a part-time person throughout the year, that doesn't change. That's the same next year as it is for right now. If you want to turn to page, I can show, it'd be 29 in your budget. This is law enforcement department within general fund, and there's two new line items there, legal fees and property abatement.
Okay,
So
so
that's
that's
your
where the
25, that's your 25,000 right there. That's different there.
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you, Preston.
Did anybody else have any comments or questions that weren't addressed? Jim? see
I had
your
one, yeah,
Okay.
I had one other one. So Preston, page 14, you lay out kind of our capital and reserve funds. I went back and looked at the last 2 years of the budget, and I noticed that between last year and this year, the replacement costs increased significantly. I think for the engines, it went from 420K to 550. For the other fire rescue vehicle, it went from 100K to 160.
Right.
Same thing with a lot of the public works fleet. So I didn't get to look at the previous year's contribution to these reserve funds. Did our contribution for this next fiscal year increase proportionately to the estimated costs increasing?
No, those funds are funded the same way next year as they have been for the last several years. But the replacement costs were updated. And I was shocked to see the new cost for fire engines. I mean, we just bought one here, in 2014, and that was 420 about at the time. Yeah, those are $550,000 now. The fleet under Public Works, those are all reflecting the state prices off the state bid. The VACCon truck is something more of a, if you had to buy a new one, that's about what you're looking at. So those were all updated this year on current replacement costs, but the manner in which these reserve funds are funded has not changed in several years.
Okay. Are we now, based on these new costs, are we putting enough away for a rainy day? And also it's a two-part question. With the Fire Capital Equipment Fund, if we were to become a regional fire entity, would that be absorbed? Would we give all of the money in that Fire Capital Equipment Fund to the combined resources?
That remains to be seen, Jim, as to how an actual annexation or a consolidation might occur. Now, if it's simply a contract situation to bring in a provider to augment, say, ambulance service or something, then no, that would not be considered. Your funding would not be part of that. But in a consolidation or an annexation, those could be considered as well. Your assets, your vehicles, your fire station, all these kind of things. Those could all be on the table, including your fire equipment fund.
And debts.
And debts, correct.
Okay, so part one, are we putting enough away for if something breaks down or multiple things break down?
Well, if multiple things break down, no, you ain't got enough, but there's enough room to plan for some of your major equipment that you have coming at you. There's enough time to plan for that.
Okay.
What you don't have funds for is the breakdown that happens. It's unexpected. Under the public works fee, you see how there's no life cycle listed for some of these other things. And I guess I could have had one there for the riding mower. I didn't put that in, I guess, but the other ones we're living on borrowed time with those. And those are going to probably be with us for many years to come. They're just beyond their useful life. But that doesn't mean even that if it does go south, we may, like a dump truck, we might be able to live without a new dump truck, you see, or the flatbed. But a vac truck, we're going to need a vac truck. So is it adequate? That's a hard question to ask. I think we're doing pretty good, but that's something that could be looked at to see if we're funding enough into that.
Okay. I know you've gotten a lot of time into this, and your next week's probably gonna be crazy. If you just look at it, if it's something you say this year, it's gonna be too hard to change, but maybe let's take a look at it next year. I'm happy with that. I just think that with those new costs updates, it needs to be in our minds that we need to update that at some point to start saving some money.
Well, you bet, Jim, and I sure appreciate that thought because when I came in here 10 years ago and dealt with these forms and all, and there was a general feeling that government shouldn't be having reserve funds. And it took years of working with the budget committee to basically understand that to be good stewards of the public, you've got to have replacement costs. You've got to fund some way depreciation. You can't just kick the can down the road and deal with a problem and expect the money to come from somewhere. You've got to be responsible, and these reserve funds are critical to our operations. And to hear a budget committee member say, hey, maybe, these are really good, maybe we need to beef those up a little. I mean, that's just great to hear, Jim. And I'll look at that. I'd say, let's not change anything for this year budget, but that is something that we can look at a little heavier for next year. Yes.
Okay, sounds good. That's all I had.
Okay, anything else? Okay, just to recap what we're sending you away with, Preston, sorry, some work. So on the water sewer, they're looking into removing the rate increase, but keeping the rate steady.
Right.
Okay. On the capital improvement program, splitting up the 2 pedestrian crossings for CIP number 10.
Yes.
And then if it's within your time, updating the capital and reserve funds to possibly reflect the replacement costs, since those were updated.
Okay, I don't want to take that on.
Perfect.
No.
Next year.
Yes. And as far as like next week's process, we have hearings. We're expecting possibly some public we can accommodate some public. The chair and Jeffrey was our chair. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe
Jeffrey,
Jeffrey, you can come down and be here to be the chair for that, possibly.
that's fine.
And so you may come up with a lot of questions as you further look at the budget. You've heard the presentation. By all means, between now and next Monday, if you have questions you'd like to run by staff, we'd be happy to hear that. But the deliberations and will occur after the hearings next week. And if you still need more time, you can schedule more meetings. Otherwise, next week could be it.
Okay,
Yeah, if your schedule changes and you can't make the meeting, please let us know. There's several considerations we need to think in terms of who's going to be here for quorum and everything. If you can't make it, please let us know. 6:30 next Monday, everybody.
Okay.
do we need a
Christine,
motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Christine, so you had listed some action items. I just wanted to reiterate that Preston was going to reconcile pages 8 and 9, those
Oh, yeah.
charts.
okay.
I got that. Yep.
Okay. That was all.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Is there a way to get a hard copy of that? I think my address changed, so that's why I didn't get one.
You bet. Can you send us an email with your address and we'll deliver one tomorrow?
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay.
All
Preston,
right.
thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Thank you.
Okay, we just need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Yes. Second?
I second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
I.
Bye.
Aye.
All right, let's get out of here.
Thank you.
Good night.